You are listening to the Galaxy Poet Podcast, a new digital platform centered around art, the creative process, and creative solutions to problems facing our world. I am your host, Jordan Ferreira. Let's begin. Welcome to episode 15 of the Galaxy Poet Podcast. My guest today is an incredibly talented creative stylist and genuinely one of the most interesting people that I know. I'm really excited to talk to her about so many of the things I think are really important to talk about in public, and yet I don't hear them discussed very often. Things like cultural narratives and how they can kind of inform people's identities and kind of unconsciously map the journey and the path that someone may take in life. And I think it's a really interesting kind of topic, and I'm really interested to talk to my friend Sunshine Ray. So I want to welcome Sunshine.
Hi.
I hope you're well.
Oh, what a beautiful introduction. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you doing this. I really do. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk to you because every conversation that we've had, I genuinely feel has been really, really helpful for me. It's helped me kind of put pieces in place as far as like understanding things like, as I mentioned, like the cultural narrative and how it can unconsciously shape your life if you let it. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, like, to what extent do you think something like that, whether it's expectations, or cultural sort of a narrative for someone's life, like drilled into you from an early age, like how deep do you think that can impact someone's identity and their life?
Oh, I think that it's always a mixture of all of it, like cultural, social, things within, our upbringing. A lot of times, it stems to childhood, but when I talk to my friends or when I talk to my clients or other people, and the deeper you dig into it, you realize the root goes very, very deep. Like sometimes it could just be even generations back, and all of those things, every single thing that happens to us, it does shape us in some shape or form, like in some way, whether we're conscious of it or not. And I always think, what you're not changing, you're choosing, whether conscious or not. And the more that I think about reality, like what is even reality? And it's just, oh my gosh, now I'm like getting lost in my own mind and thinking about all of, I'm mind fucking myself right now.
I was really enjoying all of that. I mean, if you don't change if you're not choosing, or what it was, it was so good.
What you're not changing, you're choosing, whether you're conscious of it or not, and it's like a lot of the times, it's like everyone is their own little universe, like everyone has had, when someone says like, even if they're talking about the color, if they're talking about love, or they're talking about different emotions, if two people are talking about love, like they both have had two different experiences of what love is. So how do you know that my definition of love is your definition of love? And the more that you talk about it, communicate, some people's definition of love is it can, based on their experience, it can be traumatic or abusive, or, like how do you know? And so all those little things shape us, the way that we fit into society, the way that we seek or find our identities or place our identity in someone else, or trying to find acceptance. Like, for instance, I've been thinking a lot about my own family and my own upbringing, and really during this time in the pandemic, like now that we have the time and space to process, everything is coming to light that we haven't processed in the past. And for example, even with my own family, like I'm from an immigrant family. I was born in Vietnam. I came to the States when I was 4. And in this time, I never really had a good relationship with my family, because I think culturally they're just different sets of expectations. You know, me being raised in the U.S., whereas like my family was raised in Vietnam, and during the time they've lived through wars, they've lived through famine, they've had to experience a different set of cultural events and traumas and stuff. And because I didn't know anything of their past, and I was only experiencing life from my subjective reality, I had certain expectations that I thought that they needed to meet. And the more that I learn about them, I'm just like, oh, you did the best that you could with what you had. And now that's also teaching me to question more and dig deeper and, you know, like ask about my grandparents and my great-grandparents. And everything is just like a piece of a puzzle. And the more that you learn, the more you realize you're like, oh, that's how that happened. That's why they are the way they are. And that's how that shaped them. But then that's also how it's shaped me. And if I'm able to put all those pieces together, then I have a better sense of my identity or who I am or how I fit into the world. But if we don't examine those things, then it's just very, very one-sided when everything is connected.
Yeah.
Am I trailing off?
No, I agree. And I relate to so much of what you just said, because so much of that I think is part of my own kind of journey with understanding, you know, just generationally, like my parents and like where they come from and why they do certain things and why they, I don't know, how they approach certain ways of parenting that I just don't understand, you know, and just this lack of communication, lack of boundaries, all these things.
Yes, but you know what? What were their boundaries like? How did your grandparents, do they respect their boundaries? Do they even have boundaries? Because what I realize is a lot of people, they don't know what boundaries look or feel like, or because of out of fear, they don't know how to set healthy boundaries. So our families, it's like our first set of, I feel like, karma that we have to learn how to work with and clear. And our families are one of the most difficult things to navigate, because other people in our lives, we can choose who is in our lives or not, but our families, you know, like we're stuck with them. So there are times where growing up, it was just so chaotic in my house, and everyone is pushing each other's boundaries, and everyone's like yelling at each other, and it's just chaos. But deep down, you know, everyone loves each other, but they don't know how to express it because their boundaries were also violated because they never clearly communicated. And if you don't clearly communicate your boundaries and then they're violated, then you become resentful. And it's just like this pure thing that stemmed from love. You're trying to love someone, but then you become resentful because we don't know how to navigate boundaries. I feel like at this day and age, that's been a really big word. I hear boundaries, setting healthy boundaries. I think in this time and with this generation, it's about mental health. Like, we have to communicate. We have to talk about shit. It's just, we can't just brush stuff under a rug anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I understand when you paint the picture of, you know, your family coming from Vietnam and coming from, you know, situations that were very, very like tumultuous and difficult, like it makes me understand how, you know, I relate to that, because so much of the like the quiet aspect of like non-communication as a form of like parenting, you know what I mean, that I was exposed to, it makes me have empathy for it and understand it in a way in my own case. But yeah,
one of the things that I've learned is that my family, I used to think, I'm like, wow, they're really bad at communicating. However, they weren't really communicated to, and the timelines were different, you know, like I'm sure your parents went through stuff that is not even imaginable to our current reality. A lot of the times I complain about things and I'm just like, oh, that's such a first world problem, you know, like my mom, she literally had to walk in the jungles of Vietnam. And I know parents always say, oh, when I was your age, I had to walk like 10 miles with no shoes, uphill, both ways. And I'm just like, how's that even possible? But really, like, she they went through a lot of shit, you know, like my uncle, he's missing 2 fingers because he got him blown off in like a minefield, and he's just one of the most like crazy intense people. Like you think of Tiger King and I think of like my uncle, and I'm like, they would be best friends. And just like they're just both that shit crazy. But it was a different time, and they went through a different sort of trauma, you know, like they weren't worried about mental well-being. They were worried about survival. So my grandma or my mom, their way of displaying affection is through food. You know, it's just like, it's not like, oh, how did this affect you? And how did you navigate that? How are you able to process this? It was just like, are you hungry? That's their way of displaying affection. They weren't talking about, you know, and sometimes people meet you consciously where they are able to meet themselves. So they might not even have the tools to do so. Yeah. And it's communication is the bridge to everything.
Yeah. And I agree. And I've also felt that like part of it is just a generational thing, you know, but part of it has to be so much of what you're saying, like difficult backgrounds that put someone in a position where they have to launch into survival mode. I mean, you know, all the things that perhaps, you know, we kind of value as a culture and a society now, those things aren't really available to someone in survival mode, right? It's like, so it helps me to empathize. So these conversations help me, you know, and I hope people take value from it, and I hope that's something that can help them reflect inward as well.
And you know, I've been doing a lot of the work. I've been doing the work, and it hasn't been easy. People think like, oh, you're going through a spiritual awakening or a dark night of the soul, and that it's great, and like you meditate and you smudge and everything's great. No, sometimes it's like sitting down and being like, wow, I don't like myself at all, or like I've turned into this person or the certain qualities that I don't like within other people because it's reflecting certain qualities that I don't like within myself, or I don't value myself, I don't respect myself. Like learning to look within. And I feel like recently I've also moved out of survival mode because that also is inherited at some capacity, you know, like some of the things that I say, I have to undo the programming because I'm like, oh, where did I get that? Who taught me that? How did I learn that? That was embedded from my mom or my grandma. Like when I talk to them on the phone, they're just like, oh, how's LA? It's like, it's dangerous. Are you walking around at night? Like, how are you paying rent? I'm like, I've been here for over 2 years. I'm like, rent is rent. It's going to get paid. It's expensive. Yes. It's not as any more dangerous than anywhere else. I'm like, you guys literally came to a freaking country where you didn't know the language. You didn't know anyone here. Like you did a far more brave thing than I'm doing. You know, I'm stuck.
It's interesting. I always admire those stories of people, whether it's like, you know, musicians or whoever it is that like they move to a different country to pursue a new life in whatever their medium is, and they face all the challenges like implicit in that, whether it's not knowing the language, not knowing anyone, having no friendships, like kind of feeling like an outsider. I relate to that. That struggle, it seems like a very brave thing to do, first of all, but that struggle has to be real.
Yeah, and you know, like my grandma, my mom, they've had a gnarly ass life. Like, ooh, I don't know. I'm like, sometimes I feel like their story needs to be told, but at the same time, I'm like, should I ask them first? Because it's like really crazy details about their life, and just some of the things that they went through. You know, there's a lot of trauma, and those things get inherited. Yeah. And like my grandma lived through the Vietnam War. My mom was born out of the war. She's mixed, and so it was really frowned upon to have a mixed child. Nobody wanted her. She was raised by her grandparents. She was raised. So my grandma, in order to get her alcoholic, abusive husband out of prison at the time, he was captured by like the American troops, had to sleep with an American general, got pregnant with my mom. It was just like, wow. And so I can't be upset at my mom for anything, understanding her story now, because like no shit, she has trauma. No shit, she has an identity crisis.
Right.
you know, and there are times where I also feel those things and I just think, oh my gosh, no one's going to be able to understand because growing up in this country, it's like I'm not Asian enough for the Asians, but I'm not white enough for, you know, people in the US are like, it's just, so I'm like, where do I fit in? But maybe we're here to create our own paths. It's not about fitting in, but until you learn to ground yourself and root yourself and pull back your sovereignty and realize that whatever is going on outside of me is not within my control, and whatever is within my control is like, I'm good all by myself no matter what, then that's where you come into your power, because it's not dependent on anyone else. But like my mom, she's never had that. So she places her power in everyone else. But then if you do so, it's like you're tethered, you know, your emotional state is like, ugh, you're just all over the place.
Yeah. And that in and of itself, that dictates like the course of your life, right? That one decision to put value and kind of validation in everyone else. But I understand it at the same time. It's, yeah, that's wild. I feel like, how much of that do you think is truly genetic memory? Like things like what you're talking about, whether it's trauma or any of these things?
You know, I think that at some capacity, a lot of it can be, because everything is energy, and energy can't be created nor destroyed, just redistributed. But even like certain stress, certain things, like you feel it in your body and it's there, and things that we don't know, but we feel or we pick up subconsciously, like we hold the tension in our body. I've heard of stories where people get like kidney or just organ transplants, and then all of a sudden they start to pick up weird habits, like they never liked popcorn before, and then they started eating like popcorn every single day, and like the person that they had gotten the organ from used to eat popcorn every single day. So it's crazy. I think that memories are stored in all of your cells. Like I said, everything is energy, and you have those energetic expressions still in your body. Like, isn't that what genes are? And memories can also be stored in your cells.
Yeah.
So, in a way, yeah, it's there, and that I can't speak about it cohesively. But I believe that, hell yeah, those things can be stored within us. And I'm trying to think of certain instances, like, okay. It's coming to me. Like, there are certain things that, okay, yeah, no, it's too.
No, I agree with you though. I think it's a beautiful idea, and to some extent, like you were saying, we do store information in cells that we do pass on, right? Biological information, like, so I think the idea is not far-fetched at all. And that, I'm sure you've seen the film Avatar, right? That whole sequence of like uploading memories to this kind of shared collective consciousness. There's something really beautiful about that, and I think that's probably closer to reality than we realize at the moment.
Hands down, one of my favorite movies of all times. Like, I remember leaving the theater and I was just like mind fucked. I was like, my jaw was just probably like on the floor, and I was thinking about all these ideas and everything was swirling, and it was just so crazy that some people were just like, oh yeah, it was like a cool movie, cool graphics. I'm like, the stuff that they're talking about, you know, the way that we exploit nature, the way that we exploit each other, the way that, you know, we are not like things, we're just consuming and constantly like the greed and the capitalism, and the way that we disrespect our planet, the things that are sacred that we're just like, you know, and then when they burnt down the tree, I was so sad.
I know, but it's pretty amazing that James Cameron was able to make a movie that's like, on one hand, a huge spectacle and a blockbuster movie, but on another hand, like something deeply relevant, unfortunately, but also like meaningful. Something about like, hey, exploiting nature at the cost of life is probably not a good idea. I think there's something poetic about that.
Yeah, that was so. Aren't they coming out with another Avatar?
Yeah, I think two more.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know how I feel about that. How
You
do
don't
you
like
feel?
that?
I feel that sometimes things are so amazing and beautiful, and it creates this. Like, what is it with us human beings that we feel when something is successful, we have to just keep milking it, you know? Like, why can't we just leave it as is? It's even like the first Hangover movie, you're like, oh yeah, that's freaking hilarious. And then the second and then the third, and you're just like, okay, we're just beating a dead horse at this point,
Yes.
you know?
No, I agree. I agree with that. But you know what's even crazier? I mean, this is kind of, it's sort of related, but I think it's interesting to mention the director of The Hangover 1, 2, and 3 is the same director that made Joker, which is unbelievable to me.
Wow, complete 180. I would have never guessed that.
Yeah, I mean, what did you think about Joker? Because in a similar way, that's kind of how I felt about Avatar.
The Joker, that's the most recent one, right? With was it Joaquin Phoenix?
Yeah, with Joaquin. Yep.
Okay. First of all, I took too many edibles, and I like smoked before I went to the theater, and the whole time I was just having like the worst panic attack of my life
Oh my God,
because
that
it
is
was.
so not the movie to do that.
I know, right? What the hell was I thinking? I wasn't thinking at all. It was like half price movie night. It was like the last showtime. The theater was packed. Like the security was even tighter. And I just thought of, because coming from the Midwest, Colorado wasn't that far, and thinking about the shooting. And I'm just like, why did I do that to myself? But I thought that movie was so, the way that it touched on mental health was very raw and very something that it was hard to see because it's so relevant in
Yeah.
what we're going through today. And it wasn't like stylistically, I feel like they kept it very real and didn't try to like Hollywood it too much.
Yeah.
Like we hear a lot of those stories, just being able to look into his life and what he went through and him seeking acceptance and juggling his mental health. And it was just like that movie, it stays with me. It definitely haunts me. That and Requiem for a Dream, that still messes me up.
Right. That movie, Requiem, is by maybe my favorite director ever. And I recognize completely that it's like a masterpiece. But I've only seen it maybe 2 or 3 times. I can't watch it like that often because it's so harrowing, you know?
Yes, exactly. And that's exactly what the Joker was like to me. I sat there, I mean, granted, I was just spiraling and having like a whole internal like boo, all if I was a car dash, all the lights, all the signals, everything was going off. And I was just like so like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. But to have it displayed in such a way that is so relatable almost, I think we all have those dark moments where we feel so far away from ourselves and we question our own sanity, but also being able to see that happen. And the comparison I make with that in Requiem for a Dream is that you see it happen from that person's perspective and it seems so subtle, but when you compare it from the beginning to the end, you're just like, that was a crazy ride. Like,
Yeah.
it went from 0 to 100, and that is the reality. Like, that is a lot of people's realities. And
It
so many
is.
people are like, oh, well, I don't, like that's just crazy. Like I can't relate. But then you see the progression of it, and you're just like, yeah, I can feel that now, and I see that now. Then you start to question yourself, and
Yes. Yeah.
when you start to question yourself, that's the gem.
Yeah. And the crazy thing for me in that movie, like Joker particularly, is first of all, like I'm a fan of Joaquin. I'm a fan of like the character, and I'm a fan of the mythology around it. But like the way they stripped everything away from what you typically know of the mythology, and like just like revamped it to make it this really gritty, real thing, was so powerful. But also, you see all these things that the character's going through, and then you kind of you have this moment, or at least I did. I'd love to hear what you think if it was similar for you. But like I had this thing where watching him getting like kicked so many times, and watching him be the victim in these situations where he's being manipulated or bullied or whatever it is, and then you see that moment where he flips, and then I think the moment towards the end of the film where he's standing on top of the cop car. It's a moment where I've actually felt relieved, like, oh my God, he found he found his calling. You know what I mean? Which is ridiculous, but that's how I felt.
Like you
And
felt like it was triumphant for
it
him.
was triumphant in a really like tragic way. That was my take. But I was curious, what did you feel about that whole kind of sequence and leading up to it?
I feel very, oh, that poor man needs help. He needed help. He
Yeah.
needed help a long time ago, and no one paid attention to the signs. And it's almost like it's too relatable. There's so many people like that where you're just like, oh, they're just a little bit off. Oh, whatever, And then
Right.
you like some years later down the road, and they end up like shooting a school or some shit.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so even though I think empathically I could feel for him and I could feel the pain, and yeah, maybe there was a glimpse where I was like, okay, for once he doesn't feel small, like for
Yes.
once he feels that he's coming out on top, but it was still a tragedy.
Yes.
Like,
Super tragic.
and it was just very different than the other movies, the way that the Joker is typically depicted.
Yeah.
Almost like this crazy, cartoony, having it be shot as a real person, you're like, this person is very mentally ill.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're watching it in cartoons, you're just like, oh, how, like that's crazy. Oh my God. And you're just like, wow, this is so
Yeah.
relatable. It was so sobering for me, definitely. Even
Yeah.
though I wasn't sober, I was sober.
But I can't even imagine that experience because that movie's already so heavy. And then
What was I thinking? I
I'm
don't
sorry.
know. I'm not. You know what? I did that to myself, and I learned.
Right.
I
But
definitely learned.
it's good. It's a good thing. But I think that I keep coming back to that moment where like when a work of art can actually have social commentary that's relevant and like meaningful, but also makes a sane person empathize with someone who comes from like being the victim to the villain, and you're on the villain side at the end of the film. That was like, God, I don't know what the director did or what the writer did, but like to be able to pull that off, it's pretty masterful, I thought.
Yeah. And again, back in reference to Requiem for a Dream, like you start off and you see it was Jared Leto, right?
Yeah.
And you see how, like he's a junkie, he's shooting up, and then you see the comparison with his mom and how, like she gets hooked on diet pills. Sorry if anyone's going to watch like Requiem for a Dream. I'm going to give out a couple things here. But his mom starts to spiral with her own sanity, and she gets hooked on these like diet pills. and you see these two worlds, whereas one is more socially acceptable and the other one is, like demonized, but they're two sides of the same coin.
Yes.
And then you see that transition, and that there was that moment where I was just like, that's crazy, that's bad, or that's good. And then you're just like, what the hell is good or bad?
Yes.
Nothing is good or bad. That's the realization that I've come to recently. I was listening to this podcast and they were like, what if, like everything is energy, nothing is good or bad in the universe. It's just the energy of creation, maintenance, and destruction. Like if something becomes stagnant, it has to make way for different energies. Like energy wants to move, consciousness wants to expand and grow and move. And when things just become stagnant, like it starts to self-destruct.
Right. That's beautifully said. I've never thought about it in those terms, but I think that's true. That's real.
Have you watched any of the Midnight Gospels?
No, what's that?
Oh my God. It's so good. Okay, so do you know of Adventure Time?
Yes, I'm a fan.
Okay, so Pendleton Ward, he produced Adventure Time, but he also does the illustration for Midnight Gospel. And Dustin Trussell, I'm pretty sure, I hope I'm saying his name right. He's like actually interviewing people, but Pendleton is illustrating it, animating it in a way that's really like, you can still watch it and not pay attention, but also if you sit down and pay attention, you're just like, holy shit. They were interviewing just these amazing people from all different professions, different areas. Like the first one I think was with Dr. Drew Pinsky, and they were talking about like their experiences with like drugs and different type of substances. And I think Dr. Drew said, like no drug is good or bad because we see things as like negative or positive, but he's just like the poison is in the dose, and it's how you use something, and it's the intention that you're using it with.
Wow.
And it's the energy that you tie to it, because so many people, they have an experience with something and they're just like, oh no, that's bad. Or they see that as bad or that as good.
Right.
But then if you keep doing something and then you reinforce it, and then you have that energy that, oh, this is bad, but I'm going to keep doing it. So then you see yourself as bad when it's just a thing. It's just a stimuli. It's just, and I think the way that something is presented, oh my gosh, where am I going? I'm like trailing off. It's like trying to...
No, that's what this is for. I'm enjoying all of it.
Yeah, but Midnight Gospel, freaking awesome. It presented a lot of different ideas for me to learn and digest. And, they say that our spectrum, like our eyes, we can only see a couple percentage of like the light spectrum or like colors. There's so many things that we can't see, that we just can't see, or that we can't hear or feel, but it's all around us all the time. Like space isn't empty, it's full.
Right.
And really, what is reality but what you pay attention to? Whatever your consciousness has created, has associated, has created a box for identifying. But aside from that, like, what is reality? Like, what are we doing right now? What am I even saying? What are words? They're just a collective energy that we put into a word. But other than that, I'm just speaking a bunch of gibberish right now. But you can understand what I'm saying because it's been passed down through like hundreds of thousands of years of us creating language and different, how linguistics have been shaped and the emotions tied behind it. Yeah. But it's so interesting to just sit and think about anything, everything.
Even that, I mean, what you just said about, the fact that language is really, they're sounds, they're consonants and syllables that we're creating, and somehow, it's normal. Like when somebody speaks to you, like if you understand the language, like you can understand them, and we just take it for granted, like, oh, they're saying this. But it's pretty amazing that somebody can make sounds, and and we have this whole system of like understanding and deciphering like not only meaning but like subtext and intention. Like that's fascinating.
And that's why communication is so important. You know, like
Yeah.
people would say that, yeah, the what's paramount in relationships is like trust or understanding. But how do you trust someone or how do you understand someone? Through communication? But you have to like, it makes you feel so good when people share a memory and then two people realize that they, you know, share the same memory or share the same feeling. You know, like when your parents talk about the time something happened back then in their past and they're reminiscing, and those are memories, those are emotions. That's what makes people feel connected. But I feel like a big issue now is that we don't know how to communicate anymore. We're so separated and we're all just all sitting in our own egos, and we forget that everything is connected. And so someone will have an experience and then someone else will talk about their experience, and instead of finding the similarities, they find the differences, or they're like, well, my experience it was more difficult than yours or whatever. And that's also like culturally ingrained, because like in the US it's very much about competition, you know, whereas in a lot of other countries where it's more community based and not so much like individual, there's pros and cons to both. I'm not saying like one's better than the other, but here it's almost like we're constantly competing. It's like, well, this experience was more difficult, or like, oh, that's what you're going through, here's what I'm going through. And it's like, it's not a competition, it's all valid, it's all difficult, we're all having a very human experience. But if we share more and judge less and communicate more and find our similarities rather than our differences and start off with compassion and understanding, then we can maybe get somewhere. But communication. But like, what is good communication? You know, how do you effectively communicate? I read something recently, and they said the quality of your life depends on the quality of your questions. And we don't ask ourselves enough questions. You know,
Not the
we're
right
just like,
questions, right?
we're like, why does this happen to me? It's just like, okay, what can I learn from this? What is this here to teach me? What does this feel like in my body? What does this remind me of? And I've been learning to just sit down and shut up and question more.
That's awesome.
Less.
What what are some questions then that you would ask yourself on a day-to-day basis to ask yourself, you know, more specific questions that are empowering as opposed to destructive?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one. Instead of being like, well, I feel like now mental health is a big topic of discussion, as well as self-love, because every relationship, every friendship, whatever interaction you have with the outside world is just a representation of your inner world, of the relationship you have with yourself. And so instead of, before I would break myself down, you know, like, oh, you're not doing this well enough, or you're not good enough, or whatever, you could do this better. And now it's just like, okay, how can I set myself up to do this in a better way or a more constructive way? Or how can I be more patient with myself? If I'm not understanding something, I ask myself, like, how can I break this down? Or if I were teaching it to like the 5-year-old version of me, how would I talk to myself? Or how would I explain it to myself, rather than being like, yeah, we just talk so much shit to ourselves.
Yeah.
We talk so much shit to ourselves. I've been doing this exercise where I'll look in the mirror and I'll have full conversations with myself. If I don't understand something, I'll take it back to the first time that I felt that feeling come up and what that felt like, what it reminded me of, when the first time I felt that I betrayed myself, and to just feel things, allow myself to process it without judging myself.
Yeah.
And
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, no, go ahead, go ahead.
So I'm just gonna say, like, so the idea would be to ask yourself questions that are gonna bring the most like proactive, positive sort of outlook on the situation, as opposed to like focusing on the negative. Is that sort of the idea?
Yeah. Like, oh, sorry, my brain just went off somewhere.
It's okay.
It happens a lot these days. There was a period, the past couple months have been kind of like rough. I was processing, I was going through a lot, and now it's just like everything is coming. It's like a big influx, and I'm like, okay, wait, hold on, let's find what is a stream of thought that I want to follow. You know, like this makes sense. Okay, no, this doesn't make sense. Okay, leave that out of there. And yeah, certain questions I would ask myself is, do I feel, if I'm doing something, does this bring me joy? I remember staying at this Airbnb and they wrote on the wall, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but if something resonated with me, so I like looked it up, and apparently it was like Aztec, for the translation was, nothing matters if you are not happy. Wow. It just always stuck with me that we are emotive beings. We're energy in motion, emotion, you know, and there's so many times that we pour our energy into doing things that we don't really give a shit about because we place our identity in others for validation, for acceptance, because we're tribal beings. And when we do that, we're like betraying ourselves because we're doing shit that we don't really care about. But that is what makes you human. That's the driving force, is the emotions that come up when we are doing what we're doing. And when we don't pay attention to that, then it's like we're not really living. How do you learn how to trust yourself if you don't even learn how to trust your own emotions, and you're just constantly learning to shut it down? You know, like, yes. People are just like, just shut it, just deal with it, just handle it. Like, don't be a pussy. First of all, pussies are strong as hell. So
yeah. I mean, yeah, and I want to say it's that thing is partly generational, but also it kind of ties into, I think, the cultural narrative of what masculinity is, right? I mean, that's a part of masculinity where it's like men don't cry, right? Or men aren't allowed to do this or do that. And I think the same applies to both gender. You know, I think both genders. I feel like that concept of being the alpha in a situation is like, it's really an error. You know, that idea of like having to push this down and like just get through it and like be strong, be tough, don't cry, don't show them. Like, that's really, to me, that's symptomatic of like weakness. That's not strength.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Some of like the guys who think that they're the strongest, sometimes I feel that they're the weakest, or they're the most fragile. Yeah. Because that's, you know, like that's why they build up that shell to be so hard, almost impenetrable, but you're really just shooting yourself in the foot, because we're emotive beings, and like I said, energy is energy, and it's just the energy of all of that gets pent up. And maybe that's like, I also think that we're all creators, we're all creatives. We just have to find our medium, we just have to find a way to channel it. But if you have all of that pent up aggression, if you don't learn how to process your emotion, if you're not taught that expressing yourself, processing, talking about things is safe, then you push that down, and it's going to come out in other ways. It's going to come out in aggression, you know?
Yes.
It's going to come out in violence. It's going to come out in all of these other ways, unless we learn how to find constructive ways to channel that energy into. But you know, like, I think that men and women, we all embody masculine and feminine energies, and why stigmatize one over the other? There are lessons in both of them. Like, allow people to be, you know, like, crying is very natural. It's very cleansing. Allow men to feel safe enough to communicate and to cry. because it's part of being human. There are times where, and speaking from my own personal experience, growing up being the oldest of three, my parents got divorced when I was 15. And so for a long time, I felt like I had to embody a lot of masculine energy. I had to shut down my own emotions because I needed to be there for everyone else and for my mom, and I needed to help. So I have been leaning more into my femininity, but for a long time, I felt like I had to lean into my masculinity because I needed to just handle shit.
Yeah.
And I was listening to this podcast. What is his name? The guy who wrote the book on like men are from Mars and women are from Venus.
I'm not sure what his name is. I haven't read that.
But he was talking about how actually now a lot of women have more testosterone. Their testosterone levels are higher now because they're having to do jobs more masculine jobs, and that was just interesting to think about. But it's all just hormones. It's all on the spectrum. It's all energy. Yeah. And I think that emotions it's what makes us human. We need to be able to advocate more for men too, to be able to communicate and create a safe space to talk about toxic masculinity, not in a way where, they feel attacked. It's just this, we're kind of like missing each other, Yeah. It's like Democrats and Republicans. They're like, well, they're doing this and they're doing this. And we all want the same things. We all want to be understood and loved and heard. And it just starts with compassion for ourselves, because if you have compassion for yourself, then you're going to have that to give to others. And I think a lot of people are just so depleted below their baseline, below their energetic baseline. And so they're just like, well, this person did this and it's this and that. And it's just like, hold on. If I'm learning to love myself, then I have the capacity to hold space for others, because you realize that nobody is perfect. Expectations ruin the beauty of life. I'm not perfect in this area. How can I work on this so that I don't crucify someone else for highlighting the same? So it's true what they say, like if someone's being rude, it's just because they're unhappy with themselves.
Yeah, it's a form of projection, right? It's like they're projecting their own kind of discontentment with their own interior landscape or all of that. But
there's so many factors that go into that, like sleep, nutrition, physical activity, mental stimulation. And sometimes I think that now we just have so much. We just have so much. Maybe we're so spoiled that we're just creating problems. Sure. Because some of the poorer countries, they're so happy.
Yeah, much happier, it would seem, right?
And what's amazing is that they still have to give, like my friend went to Africa and he was like, these people, these children, they don't have food. They don't have a lot of the things that we do here, but they're still willing to share with each other the very little that they have with smiles on their face. Whereas here, it's just like, oh, how much do I have? Like, how much does this person have? Do they have more than I have? Why does it have to be like that?
Yeah. I don't know. Why do you... I don't know. Maybe, I want to say it's part of human nature, but obviously it's not being reflected in the same way in those countries than it is here. So it's like, well, what is the difference?
I think it's just the capitalism, the greed, the materialism. It's, we value things here and not so much people. And we're always competing when we're all having the same experience. We're taught to not talk about the things that are shameful. And yes, this is where I bring up, social media is a big issue. Because it is at some capacity. People, I'm also guilty of it because, I'm going to post the good parts of my life. I'm not going to be like, oh, I've been I'm depressed and I'm crying and I've been eating like ice cream on my couch for the past 3 days. Everyone always wants to post the good shit, the happy shit, but then it skews reality. And then we're taught to hide the things that we're shameful about. However, we're all having the same experience. We're all going through the same things. But when you are able to open up and talk about those things and be vulnerable, that allows a space for someone else to also be like, to be human. Like we're learning to filter everything, to just scrub things, to make it look pretty, to make it perfect. And that's not human.
I agree. Have you ever seen the film The Social Dilemma?
Yeah, that fucked me up.
Same. I mean, just the way that particular film highlights all the ways that these social media platforms are like, they're keying in to the psychology of what makes people, like what creates that like serotonin or oxytocin kind of like chemical release when, like whether it's a notification, right? Or whether it's like all these things are being carefully plotted by people who have studied psychology and how to manipulate
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah,
like,
it's wild.
I used to, when I would walk into a casino, and my grandma, she crazy. I love her, but she's crazy. Like she loves going to the casino. And I remember it was like the saddest thing. I go into the casino, I'm like, man, all these people are hooked up to like oxygen tanks and they're just at the slots and they're just there for what seems like eternity. What are they getting from it? And it's dopamine. They get that little burst, the reward systems go off. And now I'm like, that's not that much different than when we're constantly scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And there's so much information for us to process at any which time with all of our apps, with all of our notifications. You go out into the outside world, you're watching TV, there's all these freaking ads. Like, how does your brain process all of that? And technology has evolved it evolves so quickly, but our brains have not. Like, our brains have not evolved to know how to even compartmentalize that or to process a lot of that stuff. And it's so sad. It was so sad to hear the stats on like how many kids between like 9 and 12 have body dysmorphia issues, or how there was like one what is that, not phobia, but one disorder where they, like a mental disorder, because they can't look the way that they do on filters.
Right.
Like they want plastic surgery to look the way that they do on filters. That just blows my freaking mind.
At 9 to 12 years old, that's
like suicide, depression.
Yeah.
How do parents even keep up to know about these things, to talk about them, when most parents are just working hard to help themselves and help their family survive, And then you have like your 12-year-old being depressed because of this complete unrealistic expectations that they have, or certain trends that are going on. Like, everything is moving so quickly, and we have to, it's dangerous.
I agree. And it makes me curious about like where this is heading in terms of like social media is so a part of all our lives already, that I feel like what is going to be the next step of evolution in that scheme of things? Like, what is it going to be? How much more intrusive could it be? It's kind of a scary question, but I'm curious about what it would look like.
It scares the shit out of me, because there's, with AIs and with virtual reality, like at some point, is everyone just going to be plugged up to virtual realities because the reality is going to be too much to process, like,
yeah.
Are people just going to be isolated into their own little boxes and plugged up to virtual reality for most of the day, because you realize like our planet's dying and our resources are being drained and people are disconnected, they can't communicate, they don't feel understood. Everything is just static. It's like a Black Mirror episode, where everyone is censored, everyone's censoring each other.
Yeah.
And we don't know how to handle emotions anymore, because we haven't learned how to process our own emotions. So then when someone else presents us with their emotions, you're just like, that's too much.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. And that's kind of the Ready Player One scenario, right? Or it's kind of like that's the case where everyone becomes the person on oxygen playing at the casino, right? Where they just
Scary, yeah. I think of Wall-E too.
I've never
I think
seen
of
Wally. Never seen. Is it good? The same idea?
I kind of also had like an Avatar moment where you're like, oh, what a cute movie, but then you're just like, fuck, that is very realistic, that we're all gonna end up just, yeah, everything is gonna become so convenient, out of convenience and ease that people aren't forced to try anymore, and they just kind of melt into, yeah. In Wall-E, you should watch Wall-E. You should watch Wall-E.
Yeah, I would love to.
I don't want to
But
like give away too much.
I know it's about a robot on the moon. That's all. That's all I know. But man, I mean, kind of what you're saying. It also reminds me of like there was an interview with an artist that I really admire named Jack White. I'm sure you're familiar with him. But like,
Hell yeah.
yeah, he's awesome.
The White Stripes?
Yeah, exactly. But he was just talking about how exactly what you were saying, where convenience is it's sort of the currency, right? With all this technological innovation in the arts, particularly, like convenience is the currency. So things get more
Well,
convenient, things get cheaper.
but we got to ask ourselves, like, is this convenience conducive to our
Exactly.
evolution, or
Yes.
is it not? That's the thing, is that there's so many times where I'm like, oh, well, this is more convenient, or even the way that we see certain things as value, like if someone's at McDonald's or if someone is somewhere else and they're like, oh, well, I can get a large soda for like 20 cents more. Yeah, that's a value. It's a 20-cent value, but are you really saving anything, or is it going to harm your health more,
Yes.
Or even like the way that we rely on, I'm just weird about self-driving cars, like the Teslas. Yeah, the design's beautiful, and the door handle. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool.
Door handle.
But
Yeah, that's cool.
but how can you trust a machine so much to just be like, cool, I'm gonna hop into this, I'm gonna take a nap, and I'm just gonna expect to arrive alive and in one piece somewhere? I don't know about you. I don't have that much faith in technology. And if we have that much faith in technology, what does that say? We're just completely checked out. We're like completely automated, We're just like, yeah, we can't learn to think for ourselves anymore because we have things that do everything for us. And for some reason, we're still miserable because we think that our life is so hard. Of like, it's not.
Yeah.
It's really not.
And I mean, yeah, that's sort of the point. And like in that interview with Jack White, he was talking about, again, some of the things that you're saying were like convenience. Everybody's chasing convenience, right? In art. So if you're a photographer, you have Photoshop. If you're a musician, you have Pro Tools. If you're an actor, you have, whatever it is in filmmaking that's going to make your performance, hyper real or like transcend just what you did in the room, right? And he was saying that like, well, where is the artistry then? If
Yes.
it's, like, and it's true. It's completely true.
The mastery in the craft, that takes time. You have to do the wax on, wax off, and anything that you get so quickly, how do you learn how to appreciate it? How do you learn to, appreciate the thing when it's there, when you've only been waiting on it for 20 minutes or a day or 2 months or whatever. And this is where I'm like, time is an illusion. But but even with like Amazon, that's so crazy. Now I've been guilty of it. I'm like, it's been 3 days. My package said it was going to be here. It used to take a month. It used to take, you order something from China, it takes like 6 weeks, and you're just like, okay, cool. But it's the expectation of it. We have these expectations, and then all of a sudden, when we're let down, that becomes like the container for our frustrations. When if you just learn to shift your perspective a little bit, there's just there's just so much other shit going on, and I feel like sometimes we're prioritizing the wrong things, and that we're just everything is just a distraction from the actual important issues.
Yeah.
You know, like we're freaking out about it taking 2 days for I don't even know, like what's some a soap or whatever to get here from Amazon. But does Flint, Michigan have clean water yet? You know, what
Right.
about the pipelines? What about all of these other things that we're not paying attention to because we're so distracted with our own shit?
Yeah. And
Or like getting mad at the barista at Starbucks for like messing up our latte order.
yeah,
Just
it's it's true. It's so true. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a comedian. I'm not exactly sure who it was, but he had a joke about that where like he was on a flight and nobody knew before getting on the flight, but they were told that the onboard Wi-Fi has gone down. And he heard somebody on the side of him say, "It's fucking bullshit." And he's like, "How did you didn't even know there was Wi-Fi. What are you mad at?" like,
yeah.
like it doesn't even make sense. But it's true. What do you think that is? Do you think that that's human nature or?
I think that it just living in our subjective realities and being entitled to things, and even with money, or I think a lot of times people don't feel that they need to try anymore because they just think, well, here, just let me throw money at you for this service.
Right.
And people don't value people anymore. They don't value the experience. It's just very much based on reward. You
Yes.
know, it's just like, here is a currency, give me the reward, give me the dopamine, give me the serotonin. And then we're just consuming. We just want more. We just want to experience something. We want to feel good.
Yeah. No,
Everyone just
I
wants
think
to.
that
It's in the process. It's all in the process.
I think that's true. And it just again it just leads me back to that question of I mean the point you made is so beautifully stated and I've never heard anyone say it that way, but like if we create AI and we allow AI to just do everything for us, to drive us right where we're going, to write our music, to write our literature. Like, what does that say about us? That's not a very good indictment on like the human race.
We're not
But
using technology. Technology is using us, you know?
already, yeah,
If you're paying for something, like if you're not, in the social dilemma, they said, if you're not making money off of something, then you are the product.
yeah,
Like, and so we're just like, here, take this. Yes, make my life easier. Yeah, but we don't question things. We're just like, okay, we want the newest thing. We want this experience. This person had this experience. We see social media and we're like, well, I want that too, and I want that too. But how is it? We just have to ask more questions and use discernment.
yeah,
Like, what is this going to provide my life? What value is this going to provide my life?
right. And
I
I
love
think
these
that's
conversations because I'm like, how did we get here?
yeah. I have no idea, but I'm enjoying it. I mean, this is awesome.
Yeah.
But I think like this pandemic has actually really been a great opportunity for like just really deep introspection for me, and I'd imagine for a lot of other people. Of course, it's tragic and it's confusing and it's anxiety ridden and all these things, of course. But I wonder if like something like this, where there's a collective change in consciousness because people are kind of they're transitioning to survival mode and they're kind of on guard and they're not necessarily they're not in a place where they can access like all that concern with like material possession and all this stuff. It's like purely survival, purely do what you have to do. And I wonder if that's going to change, particularly in America, like the concept of maybe money isn't everything. You know, I don't know. I get optimistic, but I don't quite know, because people, I don't know. It's hard to say. But what do you think about that?
I think that, again, like whatever someone's going through, it's amplified in this time. You know, if you've been nervous and anxious, it's going to amplify that. If you're, no, actually, everybody has felt at some capacity nervous and anxious. Like I went in it very headstrong. I was like, great, I can finally do all the things that I've been putting off, because I was feeling really burnt out, you know, like I started a business in March at the beginning of the pandemic. We've had to close down 4 times, and I really went through it. At first, I was like, this is great. I'm going to start doing yoga. I'm going to journal. I'm going to meditate. And then I just kind of had like a full meltdown. I was very depressed. I was very withdrawn. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't like myself very much. And then I had to really lean into that, because at the end of the day, you can't run away from yourself, you know? So you better learn to love yourself and have a good relationship with yourself, because you're always going to try to seek that in other things, situations, people, and you are what you do repeatedly, or the thoughts that you think repeatedly. And after a while, all of that becomes reinforced and automated. So simple tasks like going to the grocery store, whereas before everyone has patterns. You go to the grocery store, you're going to veer down the same aisles. If you are not intentional about what you're doing, why you're doing it, when you're doing it, then unconsciously it's just going to take over. And a lot of those normal things became so like fatiguing. Fatiguing, is that a word?
Yeah, we'll say it. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Freaking exhausting. So then if you're already in an exhausted state, because it's in a pandemic, okay, you can't go out anymore, you can't hang out with your friends, there's no live music, there's no XYZ, all of these things that used to bring you joy. Now you have to find that internally. You have to plant those seeds and tend that garden. And it's just like, okay, what outside of myself brings me peace and joy? And a lot of people, all those layers were peeled away. A lot of people had to just be like, damn, I have to take a really good look at myself and see all of these areas that have not been good in a long time. And now it had to happen now, I think, so I noticed this collective shift in consciousness. People are talking about more ideas, talking about things, they're questioning things more, like what else is there? What else is out there? How can we create different things to bring together? I love how creatives have come together in this time. Like artists are using platforms like Twitch, and they're still putting out their art, and they're collaborating with other people. And so it's not how it used to be, but it's creating this whole different thing. As human beings, we're progressive, we're innovative, we're unpredictable. We're always going to find a way. I think of this episode that I saw with, was it Parts Unknown with Anthony Bourdain about like Berlin, like after they knocked down the Berlin Wall, how all of these artists were able to see that as the catalyst for the dawn of something new. It was so experimental. People were able to just try new things.
Right. Yeah.
So
I think you're the one who had mentioned, you're the one who mentioned to me that episode, and I checked it out and I was blown away, because the artist that's featured, the Brian Jonestown, I think, is that the same episode? Brian Jonestown, songwriter, where he's cooking, right? He has this one, yeah. He's cooking, and then he runs and he does guitar track, and then he finishes, the whatever he was cooking, and then he runs back, and God, that's a beautiful way to live.
Yeah, and to feel the energy of the community that he's created, that was so beautiful to just see and feel, and that something like that is possible. And most of us don't realize that other realities are possible, because we have just consumed or without question what has been offered to us. But
right.
That's the whole purpose of art, and that's the whole purpose of creativity, is showing you that something different can be, and it gives you this inkling of inspiration. You're like, if I can imagine a better world for myself, then I can create it. And if I can show someone else the possibilities, then that births different realities. And I think that helps expand the collective consciousness. Have you seen this movie called Waking Life? It's on YouTube.
Is that Richard Linklater? I think I've seen that.
I'm not sure. I need to watch it again. But
is it like very documentary kind of style, but it's like in Texas?
Yeah. Yeah, but it started off as like a dream, and you don't know if it's like a dream within a dream, and they were presenting a lot of different ideas. But yeah, it just left me with a lot to think about and a lot to question. And that's the beauty. That's just the beauty of this world, is if we are able to just allow ourselves to experience things without our judgment on it, then we're open, we're expanded to new ideas, new possibilities.
Yeah.
But if we go in with a hardcore belief, then you've already shut that part down, that there's nothing new for you to learn. You've already, like built up these walls around the capacity, the limits of your reality.
Wow, the limits of your reality. Yeah, I think that's one lesson that anyone could benefit from. I mean, being more open-minded, being more open to possibilities, and expanding their own consciousness and developing their own kind of potential as empathetic, creative, like creatures on planet Earth. I feel like that's an empowering thought.
And the thing is, we can't make anyone be that. We just have to lead by example. That's the most difficult part, is that people will be who they are, not who you want them to be. And when they're ready for it, then they'll be open to it. But we can't be like, you need to expand your mind more. You need to do this. People don't want to be told what to do. I mean,
they'll be like, fuck you, I don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
Like,
nobody wants to be told what to do. If you tell me to go right, I'm going to go left. Why? Yeah. Just because I don't want you to tell me what to do.
Yeah. I think that's so true. I mean, I've heard that in terms of, I think it was in the Game Changers, the vegan documentary, where someone was saying, like, you can't just tell people you can't eat meat anymore, because then they'll say, well, fuck you, I'll do whatever I want. And then he was saying the way to approach it is to say, you should really try this. It's good for you, and it's alternative. It's great. It tastes great. Like, and to me, that is a great metaphor for any of these things, for any self-development kind of philosophies or anything like that. And it's profound.
And the topic of, like spirituality, and I think it's also kind of gotten a bad rap because it seems almost like a luxury, like when you think of spirituality, you think of people who go on yoga retreats, so wear like white linen and go to Sedona and have acai bowls, and and you realize that it's very accessible. You don't need all of these to go to India for a month to like find yourself or whatever. Like, it's within you. It's building a relationship with yourself and your intuition, and realizing that it's all there. You have all the tools that you need to learn to trust yourself and your gut, and to question things. And it's not anything outside of you. You don't have to go to House of Intuition and get like 30 crystals or whatever. However, you do start to accumulate that over time. Because
I think that's true. That's true. That's a beautiful way of approaching life, I think. But have you ever read any of Eckhart Tolle?
Yeah, actually, I'm staring at A New Earth right now on my shelf that I have not picked up. But I listened to a couple chapters. I listened to a couple chapters on the audiobook, and I was like, yeah, man. Yeah, right on the money.
That's awesome. That reminds me so much of like, I mean, one of the principal tenets in A New Earth, which I love. I think you'd really like it. Like, uh, it's really, really beautiful. And one of the tenets in the very beginning is that, nothing you ever can receive is going to be more than what you already have. And in so many ways, I feel like that's what you're saying, and it's true.
Yeah, when I was kind of feeling really lost and I just needed, I don't want to bring up religion, I don't want to bring up spirituality because I don't know, it's just like, yeah.
They're
I feel like
separate
it's
to you?
such a, I feel like spirituality is something you develop within yourself, and religion is like something outside of that. Yeah, actually, I'm going to stay away from that.
That's a really cool distinction, though. I like that.
But it's like I was searching for something, anything. I just felt really lost, and I realized that the more that I leaned into learning about myself and seeing that everything is connected, everything is already within me, but even spirituality can become very materialistic. People will be like, "Oh, well, I'm more spiritual than you because I went to India. I went on this yoga retreat, or I was at a monastery for like 6 months." Okay, cool. But what are you doing with that, and how are you able to make the world a better place outside of yourself? Because it's like if you call yourself super spiritual, but you are not able to be open and expanded to hold space for others, and you are still sitting in your ego, then all of that seems kind of lost.
What are you going to do with it? I mean, what are you going to do with all of that? Like, all
Yeah,
that spirituality.
yeah.
It's,
Rumi says we're all just walking each other home,
wow.
and life is just a journey of remembering and forgetting. And it's like once you I read it's like if you're trying to preach the gospel, then you have to learn the gospel. It's like people don't like being told what to do, but if you are just lead by example, and they can see the path, or you can light that path for them through your own experience, then they're going to be like, okay, like I trust this because this person has lived it. And I really think that we're just conduits. We're just all messengers for each other if we're in an expanded, open enough place to receive it. Sometimes I will be talking to some random person and they'll say something that really resonates with me in reference to a conversation I had to either myself. But then again, if you're talking to yourself, you're talking to the universe.
Yeah.
And they'll say something and I'm like, oh my God, I feel like you just like reached into my soul and you knew exactly what to say. And that happens more and more frequently these days. So it's like everyone is just a messenger for each other, for whatever that moment is, whatever you're going through. If you're open enough to it, it's all there.
Right. I agree. I think that's, yeah, I think it's, again, just a beautiful way of thinking about life and framing life, because so few people frame it in that way. I feel like it's more so about like the acquisition of material objects, or the acquisition of money, right? The acquisition of assets, or whatever it is. Like, and it's kind of sad because, just it's the same thing with like composers or musicians or artists. Like, all of the great composers basically lived the majority of their lives in complete poverty. And it was only in death where people realized, like, oh yeah, they were great. And it's like their value wasn't seen in the moment where they were alive. And that's tragic. I think that's a reflection of just probably more so this particular culture, you know, but I feel like also just, I guess, human nature, just taking things for granted and such. But I don't know.
Oh, for sure, until it finally resonates, until it finally hits, you know, like, but also that's why art and music, all those things are so relatable, or there's such a resonance, because, you know, there are moments of my life where I'll listen to Amy Winehouse and I'm just like, oh, that soothes a part of my soul. And she just, I know, I can feel what she went through, and I almost feel like it's that, it's feeling seen and it's feeling heard, you know, and like pain is the path. The struggling is part of it. And it's cliche, but they say the only way to, you know, the only way out is through. And we always try to lean out of pain and more into pleasure. And maybe it's because of evolution, you know, like we're taught that pain equals danger. But at the same time, pain breaks you open to being vulnerable. And vulnerability is where you can actually have a human experience, where you can open yourself up to feeling all the things. Because if you're only open to feeling some things, then that's not the full capacity or the full bandwidth of humanity.
Yeah.
And
I wish more people knew that.
in time, they will, you know, they'll be going through some shit and they'll listen to Hall and Oates and you're like, wow.
That whole house
They
will do it.
really poured themselves out. They're like, wow, they were really in love with this person, and wow, she didn't feel the same, or wow, they were really hurting, or wow, you know, the people are ready for things when they're ready for it. But it's there. It's there. We take things for granted until we're ready for that, and it sucks. I don't know if I'm just turning into like an older person now, where I'm just like, they don't make it like they used to. But I listen to older music, and I'm like, what was I listening to? Bread, Guitar Man.
Wow, bread. That's a great reference. Wow.
But like the songwriting, you know.
Yesterday Once More, right?
Yesterday Once More. Oh my God. I used to listen to that song every single night before I went to sleep. Like, growing up, I shared like a bunk bed with my younger brother, and I would like sleep on the top the top bunk. I would like come down the little ladder, and there was a stereo in there, and there was a cassette. And I would flip it over to side A. It would play Yesterday Once More, and I would listen to it as I fell asleep like every single night. Is it the Carpenters?
I thought so.
No. The other song is like, why do birds suddenly appear every time you are?
That's not the Carpenters, I don't think. But that's amazing. It is. I don't know.
Close to you. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I know Yesterday Once More is a classic. It's hard not to love that song. But just...
and heartbreak and all these emotions. And now it's very much this feeling of fuck bitches, get money, I'm gonna stunt, I'm gonna grind, I'm gonna hustle, money lust.
Yeah.
It's
Wait, do you think that's because, like, let's say in the 60s, right, in the time of artists like, whether it be the Carpenters or like Jefferson Airplane or Jimi Hendrix or all these people, like, there was a bit of a revolution going on, and people were kind of trying to find the edge, and they're trying to, you know, they were trying to experiment and sort of come up with something that was beautiful and different and kind of exciting. Whereas now it's like, I hear some of that, but it's not music that's represented in the mainstream. But is it just that?
We just got shit too easy now, you know?
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah.
They were dealing with very real shit. It was in the middle of war and drugs and, yeah, just being open and vulnerable to life and all of those things, being exposed, not filtering it down, or not only seeing not seeing whatever it is that you want to see. That's the scariest part about social media or IG is sometimes I'm scrolling and it almost feels like a ransom note of emotions, because you're scrolling and then you see something really sad, and then you scroll and you see something happy, you scroll, you see something that makes you hungry, you scroll and you see, like, how do you process that? How do you take the time to process those things so your world becomes what you're constantly exposed to? But how do you pick what is important when there's just an influx of information coming in all the time? You know, and then I think also, like, we're generalizing things now. People don't take the time to sit down and ask themselves, because a lot of times it's not just one emotion, it's a cocktail of different emotions.
Yeah.
You know, if you're seeing something, how does that make you feel? People will be like, oh, I'm anxious. But what other emotions are there in those layers? Or like, I'm sad. Maybe you're frustrated. Maybe you're disappointed. You don't feel understood. You know, like there's so many layers, but we just generalize things. Even language is becoming so, oh my God, it's like 1984.
Yeah.
And newspeak. Everything's becoming newspeak. It's like, that's clutch. It's lit. It's hot. And I say the same shit, you know? And maybe because we do it to connect, but we have to, even though we're tired, we gotta push through a little bit and challenge new ideas and try new things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
It's a beast.
This has been an absolutely amazing conversation, and I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. I had no idea what to expect. I was like, I don't know, what do we talk about? You know, and I just feel like it's two friends sitting here just shooting the shit. And it's been very, very, thank you. Thank you. I think my soul needed this.
Of course. Thank you. I mean, it was really, really profound, I thought. And I'd love to have you back if you'd like to come back.
Yeah, maybe we can structure it better. I think sometimes I go into things and I just trail off. And I want to be more cohesive, I think.
I thought it was cool. But yeah, I mean, sure, we can do another one and have specific things instead of
because
like,
you'll ask a question and I'm like, I don't even think I answered that question.
That's all right. That's all right. But yeah, I just want to say thank you. This was really, really fun.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm grateful that we were able to work together and figure out all the technical difficulties.
Yeah. Sorry about that, by the way.
That's what we do. No, don't apologize. I hope that in 2021 we apologize less. Unless you really offended someone or like hurt them. Aside from that, I realize that words carry energy and they're really powerful. And every single time we apologize, we're disempowering ourselves. You know, like coming from the Midwest, I would apologize for everything. I would apologize for taking up space, basically. If someone bumped into me, I would apologize to them for existing.
Wow. Yeah.
And what does that do? If you monitor yourself and see how many times you apologize in a day, you realize how, it's like we're betraying ourselves.
Wow.
I think I don't.
I feel like that's something I could definitely be more mindful of. Just, I think that politeness is one thing, but I do think, like what you're saying, when it goes too far, it's no longer just being polite. It's like you're apologizing for taking up space. I relate to that.
Yeah, you're apologizing for existing. And as a woman, I've had to really learn to fight that too, because sometimes, you know, we do it to avoid confrontation because we're tired, we're depleted, but it's so important for us to not constantly shrink ourselves because we are human beings and we're here to what is this Dita Von Teese quote? She says you can be the juiciest, ripest peach and there's still going to be someone who hates peaches.
Wow.
And I'm not apologizing for shit anymore.
I think that's a pretty empowering note to for people to take home. But
yes, we have to advocate for ourselves. Before I learned how to advocate for myself, I was trying to find that in other people. But again, it's all within you.
yeah.
It's all within you.
I'm gonna make a point to work on that. But
Another thing I learned is spelling. You're putting spells on yourself. That's why they call it spelling, because anything that you say, you're speaking, you're bringing into this physical realm. You're reaching out there and you're pulling it into this realm, because something happens when you write shit down and you can see it with your eyes. It melds with your senses and you can hear it. So anything you say after I am, you bring it into fruition. And if you're like always sorry, what energy are you bringing to that? How does that make you feel about yourself? Instead of saying sorry for being late, I'll say like, thank you for being patient with me, or thank you for waiting on me, and trying to transmute that into something positive rather than, just leaning into your emotions and how that makes you feel.
yeah, or even using language to like unconsciously kind of tear yourself down, right? I mean, I think that's a really important. That's really profound, actually. I want to work on that.
I used to say that shit. I would do something, I'd be like, oh my God, I'm such an idiot. And I'm like, no, I'm not. And I check people on that too, because if they're like, oh God, I'm just so stupid, I'm like, no, you're not. And they're like, it was a joke. I'm like, but your subconscious, your spirit doesn't know that, because you said it after I am. Like, you're programming yourself to feel that way, to think that way.
Right. It's
all
true.
programming.
Even if we're not aware that's what's happening, unconsciously there is something, like, there is a message that's being sent, which is like, I'm not enough, basically.
Yeah. So
It's true.
I wake up and I look in the mirror. It doesn't matter what's going on. I'll be like, I love you, even though you're working on things. Sometimes you're crazy, but nothing wrong with being crazy.
That's human. That's human.
Yeah, it's human.
But yeah, thank you, Sunshine, for doing this. This was really fun. I appreciate it.
Oh my God, thank you. Thank you, Rob. Yes. Is his name Rob?
Yep,
Thank you.
That's Rob, yep. Yeah, I'd love to do it again, and
Okay, cool.
hope you're safe, and I'll see you soon.
Same. Take care.
You too.